I've been accused of being a spammer. What can I do? Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. It's a lengthy question, but the bottom line here is that an individual wrote to me saying, hey, I've been wrongly accused of being a spammer. When I send out my 150 recipient newsletter, I get bounces back that say my sending email address has been rejected. What does that mean? Why is it thinking I'm a spammer? I'm not spamming. I always ask for permission. I'm not sending out things that people aren't expecting, and so forth. Well, the good news here is that the person who was asking the question actually did all of the right things along the way to reduce the chances of their being labeled as a spammer. Note I said reduce. There are no absolutes in this industry. You can still end up getting labeled as a spammer, and I'll explain a couple of the ways that that can happen in a minute. It's also possible that this specific message may not actually have anything to do with spam at all. But let's review some of the things that might be going on. The error message that came back in the bounce was return address was refused. Well, one of the issues I often have with bounce messages, error messages from email, and I know that it's a problem many people have, is that they're often very obscure and very ambiguous. Return address was refused could mean so many different things. It could mean that, well, maybe the user you're sending to actively blocked your address. Uncommon, rare, but could be. It could mean that the mail server was unable to validate the email address you're using as being a valid email address. Again, rare, but possible. It could mean a configuration on the part of the recipient's email server. Possible. And of course, it could mean that the email server has somehow decided that you have a reputation of sending spam. Lovely. What can you do about that? Sadly, not a whole lot. Now, I have to start by making an assumption. And that assumption is you're not a spammer. You're actually doing what you said you were doing in the question. You actually are sending your email only to people that are actually requesting it. And what you are sending them is what they expect. The biggest scenario where that second one comes into play is if you set up an email newsletter and you're sending it to people, as this person has done for something like 10 years, and all of a sudden you decide to pivot. All of a sudden you decide to start sending out something else. It could be benign, it could be semi-related, it could be unrelated. The worst scenario is when you take an information newsletter and turn it into a sales newsletter. Well, yes, when things change, recipients aren't getting what they expect, and therefore they are somewhat more likely to mark your email as spam and therefore negatively impact your reputation as a sender. Now, you've said you're not doing this. I'm going to believe you, but I needed to get that qualification out of the way. Because if you are a spammer, I'm not going to help you. Now, spam versus spam. It's certainly possible that people have been clicking the "This is spam" button by accident. It actually happens a fair amount. The spam button is often right next to the delete button, and people will click one when they mean the other, or they just don't understand the difference and they just want the email gone, so they click on junk or spam. But the bottom line is it could be very benign. If it happens often enough, well, yeah, that affects your reputation, but it's out of your control. More commonly, though, is that, as I've talked about a lot, spam is now spoofing the from address very commonly. What I mean is that when you get a piece of spam, you take a look at the from line, that has nothing to do with where the email actually came from. It's usually faked. It's usually set to be some other poor, random, innocent bystander's email address. And as a result, yes, it really is spam, but it looks like that came from that other person who wasn't involved at all. What happens when the recipient actually marks the "This is spam" button? Well, since it's so common these days, most spam filters should be ignoring the from address, in the sense that if an email is marked as spam, the from address should not be something that is taken into account because it's bogus. It has nothing to do with where the email actually came from. However, not all email services work that way, and they could still be paying attention to the from address. The scenario where it hurts you is if your email address shows up in the from address of some actual spam, and somebody marks it as spam, and that service decides to actually look at the from address. You take the hit. You're an innocent bystander, but you take the hit. And there's nothing you can do. Now, many of the error messages, including the bounce message that was reported by this questioner, say if you want more information, if you want to contest this, or if you want to do something about it, email postmaster at, and then the email service in question. Here's the problem. Postmaster is by definition supposed to be a standard email address. Every email domain that is capable of sending email is supposed to also be able to receive email sent to postmaster at that domain. However, since it's standard, it gets a lot of mail. It gets a lot of spam. And as a result, when there is somebody paying attention to it, yeah, they're overwhelmed. They're waiting in spam. Your message is easily lost. It is not at all uncommon for email sent to postmaster to be completely ignored. Shouldn't be. The pragmatic situation is simply this. They just may not be able to devote their resources to pay attention to the postmaster email address. And the stock answer that showed up in the email message that you got back, that was a stock answer. It probably came with their mail server. They probably didn't type it up themselves at all. Now, there is one way that you could legitimately be at risk of being labeled a spammer by your behavior. You're not a spammer. I'm not saying you're a spammer by doing this, but spammers do this. And the fact that you're doing it basically means you're a little bit more likely to be labeled as a spammer. What is it you're doing? You're sending a single message to a large number of people, 150 of them apparently, and you're doing it from your personal email account. When you think about it, when a hacker hacks an email account, that's almost exactly what they do. They start sending spam exactly that way using the hacked email account. Honestly, I don't want to say this isn't what personal email was designed for. It probably was. But the pragmatic reality of today's internet and today's spam fighting techniques is that sending a single email to 150 people at once from your personal email account, not a good thing. In fact, many email providers don't even allow it anymore. So what do you do instead? My recommendation, and I've actually had to do this myself for a couple of private email lists of my own, is to either set up something like a Google group or a groups.io groups. If you remember Yahoo groups, it's very similar to that you can get all of your recipients to become a member of, and then use that service to send email. It can even be an announce-only group, right? You don't necessarily have to allow discussion. But the bottom line here is that Groups.io, Google Groups, they're designed to send a single message to a bunch of people all at once, which is exactly what you're trying to do. Another scenario, and this is something you might want to consider if what you're doing is what we would more formally call a mailing list or a newsletter, is to actually use a service designed to do exactly that. I use Aweber for the askleo mailing list, Confident Computing. Another one is MailChimp, a very popular one that's been around for a long time. There are many such services, and they are designed specifically, again, to send a large number of emails with a single message to a large number of people. So that is something that, again, doing it on your personal account might be affecting you. might be tipping the scales in the wrong direction. Whereas if you are to use a service designed to do this, then you're at least avoiding that negative implication. So, like I said, in the situation you're in, there's not a lot you can do specifically about the bounces you're seeing, other than make sure you're not a spammer, and if you can, improve the process that you're using to send your email to be less spammer-like. For updates, for comments, for links related to this topic and more, please visit askleo.com/5081. I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.